A millionaire humiliated his wife in public and left the party with a mistress. 10 years later, he discovered that in the bustling city of New York, where skyscrapers mingled with historic architecture, lived Alexander Foster. At 35, he was the epitome of success. Owning one of the largest real estate companies in the United States, Alexander had everything money could buy: luxury cars, expensive clothes, and a mansion fit for a king. But his greatest achievement, in the eyes of many, was his wife Elena. With her long dark hair and honey-colored eyes, Elena was a vision of beauty. More than that, she was kind and compassionate, qualities that contrasted sharply with Alexander's relentless ambition. On that summer evening, the couple prepared for an important party. It was the 10th anniversary of Alexander's company, and all the city's big shots would be there. Dressed in an elegant blue gown, Elena looked at herself in the mirror, her hand gently resting on her belly. She smiled, harboring a secret she couldn't wait to share with Alexander: she was pregnant. "Come on, dear. We can't be late for our own party," Alexander shouted from downstairs. Elena took a deep breath, deciding to wait until after the party to share the news. It would be the perfect gift to crown the evening's celebration. The party was a spectacle of luxury and extravagance. The hall shimmered with golden lights, champagne glasses clinked, and the air was filled with laughter and conversation. Alexander mingled among the guests, his charming smile never wavering as he closed deals and exchanged gossip. Elena watched from afar, noticing how her husband drank more than usual. Her eyes narrowed when she saw Lucy, Alexander's assistant, approaching him with another glass of champagne. There was something in the way Lucy looked at Alexander that made Elena uncomfortable. As the hours passed, the moment for Alexander's speech arrived. He staggered slightly onto the stage, his face flushed with alcohol. Elena felt a knot in her stomach. "My friends," Alexander began, his voice louder than necessary. "Thank you for being here on this special night. 10 years of success. And all thanks to my hard work and vision." The crowd applauded, but Alexander wasn't finished. His eyes found Elena in the crowd, and a strange smile formed on his lips. "And of course, I can't forget to thank my lovely wife, Elena." He gestured extravagantly in her direction. "After all, behind every great man, there's a woman reaping the benefits of his success, right?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the hall. Elena felt her face burn with shame. "Come on, dear, don't be shy," Alexander continued, his voice now laced with sarcasm. "Come up here and show everyone how much you love the benefits of being Mrs. Foster. The jewelry, the designer clothes, the trips, all courtesy of my hard work." Paralyzed by shock and humiliation, Elena couldn't move. Tears began to form in her eyes as guests whispered and cast sympathetic glances her way. That's when Lucy appeared next to Alexander on stage, whispering something in his ear. He laughed loudly, draping his arm around her waist in a way that was too intimate to be appropriate. "Well, it looks like the party's over for me, folks," Alexander announced, his voice hoarse. "Lucy here reminded me of an important commitment I have. Enjoy the party." With that, Alexander left the stage, practically dragging Lucy with him. They passed by Elena, who was still petrified in the middle of the hall. Alexander didn't even glance at her. As the doors closed behind them, it was as if something inside Elena closed too. The tears she had held back finally fell, and she ran out of the hall, ignoring the concerned calls of some guests. That night, as the city of New York slept, Elena packed her bags with trembling hands. Her heart was broken not just for herself, but for the baby Alexander would never know existed. With one last look at the life she was leaving behind, Elena set off into the darkness of the night, determined to start anew, far from the pain and humiliation Alexander had caused. The morning sun bathed the city of New York, its golden rays reflecting off the skyscraper windows. Atop one of these imposing buildings, in a luxurious office, Alexander Foster sat contemplating the city he nearly owned. At 45, Alexander was the personification of professional success. His company, Foster Enterprises, had expanded beyond the United States borders, with projects throughout Europe and even within the U.S. His face often graced the covers of business magazines, portraying him as one of the country's most successful entrepreneurs. Despite all his success, there was an emptiness in his eyes that no amount of money seemed to fill. Alexander swiveled in his chair, his gaze landing on a framed photo on his desk. It was an image of him and Lucy, his wife of nearly 10 years, on one of their many luxury trips. Lucy was stunning, that was undeniable. With her perfectly styled blonde hair and bright smile, she was the perfect companion for social events and business meetings. But behind the cameras and away from public eyes, their relationship was cold and distant. The phone on his desk rang, pulling Alexander from his thoughts. It was Lucy. "Alexander, dear," Lucy's melodious voice came through the device. "Remember we have that dinner with the Rodriguez couple tonight. Please don't be late." "I'll be home on time, Lucy," Alexander replied, his tone more tired than he intended. "Great. Oh, and please, let's not talk about children tonight. You know how I hate it when people start on that topic." With that, she hung up, leaving Alexander alone again with his thoughts. The mention of children always left a bitter taste in his mouth. It was a topic Lucy avoided at all costs, making it clear from the start of their marriage that motherhood was not in her plans. Initially, Alexander didn't mind. He was focused on his career, on building his empire. But now, at 45, he found himself looking at families in parks, wondering what it would be like to have a child to teach and love. Pushing those thoughts aside, Alexander turned his attention back to the documents on his desk. Among them was a report on a mansion he was considering selling. It was a magnificent property, one of the first he had bought when his business began to take off. Now, it seemed the right time to let it go and invest in new projects. As he reviewed the sale details, his assistant entered the office. "Mr. Foster, we have a potential buyer for the mansion. She would like to schedule a visit for tomorrow, if possible." Alexander nodded absently. "Sure, schedule the visit. What's her name?" "Elena Vega, sir." Alexander froze. The name echoed in his mind, bringing forth memories he had tried to bury for a decade. It couldn't be the same Elena, could it? "Mr. Foster? Is everything all right?" the assistant asked, noticing his boss's sudden pallor. Alexander quickly composed himself. Yes. Just schedule the visit. I'll accompany her myself." When the assistant left, Alexander leaned back in his chair, his mind a whirl of emotions. After 10 years, could it be possible that fate was bringing Elena back into his life? The next day, Alexander arrived at the mansion early, his heart pounding with anticipation. As a car parked at the entrance, he held his breath. A woman stepped out of the vehicle, and Alexander felt as if time had stopped. It was Elena, still as beautiful as he remembered. But she wasn't alone. Beside her, stepping out of the car, was a boy of about 10 years old. Alexander's world seemed to spin. The boy had his eyes, his smile. There was no doubt. In that moment, as Elena and the boy approached, Alexander realized his life was about to change forever. The past he had left behind was now before him, bringing with it questions, possibilities, and perhaps, a chance for redemption he never knew he needed. Alexander's heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. Standing before him was Elena. 10 years had passed, but she still had the power to take his breath away. Her dark hair now had streaks of silver, and small wrinkles formed around her eyes when she smiled hesitantly. But what really captured Alexander's attention was the boy beside her. The boy, about 10 years old, looked at Alexander with a mix of curiosity and shyness. His eyes, so similar to Alexander's own, sparkled with intelligence. The businessman felt a surge of emotions he couldn't name. Could it be possible that this boy was? "Hello, Alexander," Elena's soft voice brought him back to reality. "This is my son, Matteo." Alexander swallowed hard, trying to find his voice. "Hello, Elena." "Hello, Matteo," he managed to say, his gaze shifting between mother and son. "Welcome. Please, come in." As he led Elena and Matteo through the mansion, Alexander struggled to maintain his composure. His mind was swirling. The timing was perfect. The boy was the exact age he would be if. But no, he couldn't allow himself to think about that now. Elena walked around the house, asking questions about the property's features, acting as if she were just an interested buyer. But Alexander could feel the tension in her voice, the way she avoided looking directly at him. Matteo, on the other hand, seemed fascinated by the huge house. His eyes lit up at the sight of the swimming pool in the garden and the home theater in the basement. "Mom, can we really live here?" he asked, his voice filled with childish excitement. Alexander's heart clenched at the word mom. Elena was a mother. This wonderful child was her son. And possibly. "We haven't decided anything yet, dear," Elena replied with a gentle smile. "We're just looking, remember?" Alexander cleared his throat, trying to regain his professional demeanor. The house has 5 bedrooms, all with en suites. The office on the second floor has an incredible view of the city. And the garden, as you can see, is perfect for children. He couldn't help but notice how Elena's eyes softened when he mentioned the children. For a moment, their gazes met, and Alexander felt as if he were being pulled back in time to the days when they were young and in love. The visit continued, with Alexander showing every room, every detail of the house. But his mind was far from the real estate details. He couldn't stop watching Matteo, noting every little gesture, every expression that reminded him so much of himself as a child. When they reached the kitchen, Matteo was delighted with the large central island. "Mom, look! We can make a ton of cookies here." Elena laughed, a sound Alexander hadn't heard in years, and that made his heart skip a beat. "You and your cookie obsession, Matteo. Do you like making cookies together?" Alexander asked, trying to keep the conversation casual. "Oh, yes," Elena responded, her eyes glowing with maternal love. "It's our Sunday afternoon tradition. Isn't it, Matteo?" The boy nodded enthusiastically. "Do you like cookies, Mr. Foster?" The innocent question caught Alexander off guard. Yes, I like them very much," he replied, feeling a sudden urge to cry. What would it have been like to have spent the last 10 years making Sunday cookies with this boy? As the visit drew to a close, Alexander felt a growing sense of desperation. He didn't want Elena and Matteo to leave. He wanted more time, more chances to get to know them, to understand what he had missed. "So, what do you think of the house?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Elena looked around, then at Matteo, who was still smiling broadly. "It's a beautiful house, Alexander. But it's a big decision. We need to think about it some more." Alexander nodded, fighting the urge to beg them to stay. "Of course, I understand. Take all the time you need. And if you want to make another visit, I'm at your disposal." As they headed for the door, Alexander couldn't help himself. "Elena," he called, his voice almost a whisper. "Can we talk? In private?" Elena hesitated, glancing at Matteo. "Now isn't a good time, Alexander. Maybe another day." With one last wave, Elena and Matteo got into the car and drove off, leaving Alexander standing at the entrance of the mansion, feeling lonelier than ever. That night, lying in his king-size bed next to Lucy, who slept soundly, Alexander couldn't close his eyes. The image of Matteo smiling at him flashed every time he blinked. The questions he hadn't had the courage to ask Elena haunted him. Was Matteo his son? Why had Elena never told him about the pregnancy? And if it was true, how could he make up for 10 lost years? Alexander knew he couldn't simply go back to his normal life after this encounter. Something had awakened within him, a yearning, a hope, a burning desire to correct the mistakes of the past. As the sun began to rise, painting the New York sky in shades of pink and orange, Alexander made a decision. He would do whatever it took to get closer to Elena and Matteo. Even if Matteo wasn't his son, though in his heart, he already knew the truth, he needed to be part of their lives. With this resolution in mind, Alexander finally fell into a restless sleep, dreaming of cookie sundaes and children's laughter echoing through the corridors of a house that could have been his home. The days following Elena and Matteo's visit to the mansion were an emotional roller coaster for Alexander. He could barely concentrate at work, his mind constantly drifting to the bright-eyed boy who might be his son. After much deliberation, he decided he couldn't just sit back and wait for fate to bring them together again. With trembling hands, Alexander picked up the phone and called Elena. After a few rings, he heard her voice on the other end. "Hello? Elena, it's Alexander. I was thinking, maybe we could meet up. To talk about the house, of course," he quickly added. There was a pause before Elena responded. "All right, Alexander. How about tomorrow at the park near the mansion? Matteo likes to play there." Alexander's heart leaped at the mention of Matteo's name. "Perfect. See you there at 3? The next day, Alexander arrived at the park half an hour early. He sat on a bench, watching the children play, imagining what it might have been like to watch Matteo grow up. When he finally spotted Elena and Matteo approaching, he felt a mix of anxiety and joy. "Hello, Mr. Foster." Matteo greeted him excitedly. "Hello, Matteo. Please, call me Alexander," he replied with a smile. Elena looked nervous but made an effort to appear casual. "Matteo, why don't you go play for a bit while I talk with Alexander?" As the boy ran off towards the swings, Elena and Alexander sat down on the bench. "Elena, Alexander began, but she cut him off. "Alexander, before you say anything, I need you to understand something. Matteo is my life. Everything I do is for him. Alexander nodded, feeling the weight of her words. I understand. And I want you to know that I respect that. I just wanted a chance to get to know him better. To get to know both of you. Elena studied him for a moment before speaking. All right. But let's take it slow, okay? Over the weekends that followed, Alexander began spending more time with Elena and Matteo. They went to the zoo, had picnics in the park, and even cooked together in the kitchen of the mansion Elena was still considering buying. Every moment with Matteo was precious to Alexander. He discovered the boy loved soccer and offered to teach him some tricks. He saw how Matteo's eyes lit up when he talked about science at school, reminding him of himself as a child. Did you know that the stars we see in the sky might already be dead? Matteo asked one evening as they watched the stars in the mansion's garden. Alexander smiled, feeling a wave of pride. That's right, Matteo. Their light takes so long to reach us that, by the time we see it, the star might no longer exist. Elena watched these interactions with a mix of joy and apprehension. It was undeniable that Matteo and Alexander were forming a bond, but she still hesitated to reveal the truth about the boy's paternity. Meanwhile, Alexander's home life was becoming increasingly tense. Lucy began to notice his frequent weekend absences and his distant behavior. "Where have you been going all these Saturdays?" she asked one night, her voice laden with suspicion. "Work, dear. I've been showing a significant property to a client," Alexander lied, feeling guilty but not ready to face the truth with Lucy. As he spent more time with Matteo and Elena, Alexander's heart opened in a way it hadn't for years. He found himself wondering what it would be like if they were a real family, living together in the mansion, sharing meals, helping Matteo with his homework. One afternoon, while helping Matteo build a model solar system for the school science fair, Alexander felt such a strong connection that he almost let slip the question that tormented him. "Matteo, have you ever wondered about your father?" The boy stopped what he was doing and looked up at Alexander with his big brown eyes. "Sometimes. Mom says he couldn't stay with us, but that he loves me from afar." Alexander felt a lump in his throat. "I'm sure he does, Matteo. I'm sure he loves you very much." That night, after Matteo and Elena had left, Alexander sat in the mansion's garden, lost in thought. The connection he felt with Matteo was undeniable, and each moment with the boy only deepened his suspicion that he was his son. But he knew he couldn't confront Elena directly, not yet. When he got home, he found Lucy waiting for him in the living room, an expression of irritation on her face. "Where have you been all day?" she asked, her voice laden with suspicion. Alexander hesitated for a moment before responding. "I was showing the mansion again to that buyer, Elena. She brought her son this time." Lucy narrowed her eyes. "Again? Alexander, you've been spending an absurd amount of time with this woman. Since when are you so dedicated to a single sale?" "It's an important property, Lucy. I need to make sure everything is perfect," he replied, avoiding his wife's gaze. "And since when does that include spending Sundays playing with her son?" Lucy retorted, her voice rising. "I'm not a fool, Alexander. There's something you're not telling me." Alexander felt the weight of guilt in his chest. He knew he was hiding the truth from Lucy, but how could he explain something he didn't fully understand himself? "Lucy, it's not what you're thinking. Elena is just a client, and Matteo is a lovely boy. There's nothing wrong with being kind to them." Lucy stood up, her eyes blazing with anger. "Kind? You're obsessed, Alexander. I've never seen you so interested in a family before. What's so special about this woman and this boy?" Alexander's heart raced. He wanted to tell Lucy his suspicions about Mateo, to share the whirlwind of emotions he was feeling. But he knew he couldn't, not without being sure, not without talking to Elena first. "Lucy, please, trust me. There's nothing going on beyond business," he said, trying to calm his wife. But Lucy was unconvinced. With a final look of distrust, she left the room, leaving Alexander alone with his thoughts and his guilt. That night, lying in bed next to a Lucy who pretended to sleep, Alexander couldn't stop thinking about Mateo and Elena. He knew he was walking a fine line, risking his marriage and his reputation. But the possibility of having a son, of being a part of Mateo's life, was too strong to ignore. Alexander closed his eyes, knowing things would only get more complicated from here. He would have to find a way to discover the truth about Mateo without alienating Elena or destroying his marriage with Lucy. It was a task that seemed nearly impossible, but for the chance to be a father, he was willing to try. As Alexander grappled with his conflicting feelings in the present, Elena often found herself lost in memories of the past. Sitting in her small apartment, watching Mateo sleep peacefully, she couldn't help but recall the first days after leaving New York. With just a suitcase of clothes and a broken heart, Elena had arrived in Valencia, determined to start a new life for herself and the baby growing inside her. The first weeks were a blur of tears, morning sickness, and a desperate search for a job. "You can do it, Elena," she whispered to herself every morning, staring at her tired reflection in the mirror. "You are strong enough to do this on your own." She landed a job as a waitress in a small cafe, hiding her pregnancy under loose aprons until it was no longer possible. Her boss, a kind man named Carlos, surprised her with his understanding. "My daughter went through something similar," he said, patting her shoulder reassuringly. "You can stay as long as you need." Months passed, and Elena's belly grew along with her determination. She saved every penny, preparing for the baby's arrival. At night, alone in her small rented room, she talked to her belly. "It'll just be the two of us, little one," she whispered, stroking her belly. "But I promise it will be enough." The day Mateo was born was the scariest and most wonderful of Elena's life. Alone in the delivery room, she wished for a brief moment that Alexander was there. But when they placed the tiny bundle in her arms, all thoughts of the past vanished. "Hello, Mateo," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm your mother." The first years were tough. Sleepless nights, constant financial worries, and the loneliness of being a single mother weighed on Elena. But every smile from Mateo, every small achievement, made it all bearable. She watched, amazed, as Mateo took his first steps, spoke his first words, and showed early signs of intelligence that reminded her so much of Alexander. "Mama, why is the sky blue?" little Mateo would ask, his large eyes filled with curiosity. Elena smiled, explaining as best she could, always encouraging his thirst for knowledge. Over time, Elena returned to school, taking night courses while a kind neighbor looked after Mateo. Her determination paid off when she finally landed a job at a marketing firm, allowing them a more comfortable life. Each accomplishment was celebrated with Mateo. "See, my love? Mommy made it. We made it," she would say, hugging her son. But not all moments were easy. There were nights when Elena cried silently, remembering the life she had left behind, wondering if she had made the right decision by not telling Alexander about the baby. On birthdays and Christmas, she watched Matteo playing alone and felt a twinge of guilt. He deserved a father, a complete family. But then she remembered the pain of betrayal, the public humiliation, and she hardened her heart. It's better this way, she told herself. We're fine on our own. Now, with Alexander back in their lives, all these memories and repressed emotions were resurfacing. Elena wondered if she had done the right thing by letting Alexander get close to Matteo. Looking at her son sleeping, she whispered, "I hope I'm doing the right thing, my love. Mommy just wants the best for you." With a sigh, Elena lay down, knowing the days ahead would be filled with tough decisions and painful truths that would have to be faced. The sun had barely risen when Lucy woke up, her restless mind not letting her sleep. For weeks, she had noticed changes in Alexander's behavior. He was distant, always lost in thought, and his weekends, previously dedicated to her and social commitments, were now shrouded in mystery. Determined to find out what was happening, Lucy decided to follow her instincts. She grabbed Alexander's cell phone while he was showering and, with trembling fingers, began to search through his recent messages and calls. That's when she saw it, dozens of calls and messages exchanged with a certain Elena Vega. The name wasn't unfamiliar, it was that woman interested in buying the mansion. But why all these conversations? Why the weekend meetings? Lucy's stomach churned. There was something more going on, she was sure of it. Her heart racing, she continued her investigation until her eyes landed on a photo. It was Alexander, smiling in a way she hadn't seen in years, next to a beautiful woman and a boy about 10 years old. At that moment, Lucy felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. The boy was the spitting image of Alexander as a young man. The same eyes, the same smile. There was no doubt this child could only be her husband's. It can't be, she murmured to herself, her hands shaking so much she almost dropped the cell phone. Across town, Alexander was once again with Elena and Matteo. They had decided to spend the day at the amusement park, a plan that filled Matteo with joy. "Look, Alexander. That roller coaster looks amazing," exclaimed the boy, pulling the businessman's hand with excitement. Alexander smiled, feeling a wave of affection that caught him off guard. "Wanna go? We can go together, if your mom allows it." Elena, watching the interaction, felt her heart tighten. It was painful to see the bond forming between father and son, even though Matteo didn't know the truth. Part of her wanted to tell everything, and the secrets. But fear still paralyzed her. While Alexander and Matteo enjoyed the rides, Elena found herself wondering how things might have been different if she had told the truth from the start. Perhaps Matteo could have grown up with a father present. Maybe. Her thoughts were interrupted when Alexander and Matteo returned, both laughing and with their hair tousled from the adrenaline of the roller coaster. "Mom, it was amazing." "Alexander wasn't scared of anything," exclaimed Matteo, his eyes shining with admiration. Elena forced a smile, trying to ignore the twinge of guilt in her chest. "I'm glad you had fun, dear." Alexander, sensing something in Elena's gaze, approached her as Matteo ran to buy some cotton candy. "Is everything all right?" he asked softly. Elena hesitated for a moment before answering. "Alexander, I'm not sure this is a good idea. Matteo is getting attached to you and..." "Is that bad?" Alexander interrupted her, his voice mixing confusion and a hint of hurt. "That's not it," Elena sighed. "It's just that, there are so many things left unsaid between us. So many secrets." Alexander's heart raced. Was this the moment? Would Elena finally confirm his suspicions about Matteo? He opened his mouth to speak, but was interrupted by Matteo's excited return. "Look, I got some for you too," Matteo announced, handing cotton candy to both. The moment passed, and the truth remained unsaid, hanging in the air like a heavy cloud over them. Back at her home, Lucy waited for Alexander, her mind a turmoil of emotions. Anger, hurt, betrayal all mixed in her chest, threatening to explode at any moment. When Alexander walked in, she was sitting in the dark living room, only the light of a lamp illuminating her tense face. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice as cold as ice. Alexander, caught off guard, stammered for a moment. "I was handling some work matters." "Lies!" Lucy shouted, suddenly standing up. "I saw the photos, Alexander. I saw the messages. Who is that boy?" Alexander's blood ran cold. He knew this moment would come, but he wasn't prepared. How could he explain something he didn't fully understand himself? "Lucy, I can explain," he began, but was interrupted. "Explain what? That you have a hidden son? That you've been spending weekends with your old girlfriend and a child who looks just like you?" Lucy was beside herself, years of resentment and insecurities surfacing. Alexander tried to approach, but she recoiled. "Don't touch me. I want the truth, Alexander. All of it." At that moment, facing his wife's fury and the weight of his own secrets, Alexander realized he could no longer run. It was time to face the truth, no matter the consequences. "Sit down, Lucy," he said, his voice weary. "I'll tell you everything from the beginning." Meanwhile, in her small apartment, Elena tucked Matteo into bed, her heart heavy with the day's events. "Mom," Matteo called sleepily, "Alexander is cool, isn't he? Can he come more often with us?" Elena felt tears form in her eyes. "We'll see, dear. Now sleep." Kissing her son's forehead, Elena left the room and leaned against the hallway wall, letting the tears finally fall. She knew she couldn't keep this secret much longer. The truth, as painful as it might be, needed to come out. With trembling hands, she picked up her phone and typed a message to Alexander, "We need to talk. About Matteo. About everything." The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: nothing would be the same after this conversation. The morning arrived with palpable tension in the air. Alexander had barely slept, Elena's words echoing in his mind, "We need to talk. About Matteo. About everything." He knew this day could change his life forever. Across town, Elena was preparing breakfast for Matteo, trying to act normal despite the turmoil in her chest. She watched her son eat his toast, unaware of the storm approaching. "Mom, can I go play with Miguel after school today?" Matteo asked, his innocent voice cutting through Elena's thoughts. "Of course, dear," she replied, forcing a smile. "Just don't be late for dinner, okay?" Meanwhile, at Alexander's office, Lucy appeared unexpectedly. Her eyes were red and swollen, evidence of a sleepless night. "We need to sort this out, Alexander," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't live like this anymore." Alexander nodded, feeling the weight of his decisions. "I know, Lucy. I..." Before he could continue, his secretary burst in. "Mr. Foster, sorry to interrupt, but Mrs. Vega is here. She says it's urgent." Alexander's heart skipped a beat. Elena was here, now. He looked at Lucy, seeing understanding and anger growing in her eyes. "Let her in," he told the secretary, bracing himself for what was to come. Elena entered the room, stopping abruptly upon seeing Lucy. "Oh, sorry, I didn't know you were busy." "No, please, come in," said Lucy, her voice laden with sarcasm. "I think it's time we put all our cards on the table, isn't it?" The tension in the room was palpable. Alexander found himself between the two women, feeling the weight of years of secrets and lies. "Elena," he began, "I think it's time we were honest. All of us." Elena took a deep breath, gathering courage. "Yes, you're right. Alexander, Matteo. Matteo is your son." The words hung in the air for a moment before Lucy let out a bitter laugh. "I knew it. From the moment I saw that picture, I knew." Alexander felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Even suspecting, hearing the confirmation was surreal. "Why didn't you ever tell me, Elena?" "How could I?" Elena replied, tears in her eyes. "After that night, the way you humiliated me. I couldn't." Lucy watched the exchange, her anger growing by the second. "So, what happens now? You run back to your old family, Alexander? And me? Where do I stand in all this?" Alexander felt torn, guilty, lost. "Lucy, But before he could continue, the office door opened again. It was Matteo. "Mom?" "Alexander," the boy looked confused at the adults in the room. "What's going on?" The silence that followed was deafening. Elena rushed to embrace her son, while Alexander and Lucy exchanged panicked glances. "Matteo, what are you doing here?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. "School let out early and I came looking for you," Matteo replied, his eyes roaming between the adults. "Is everything okay?" Alexander stepped forward, feeling it was time to face the truth. "Matteo, there's something we need to tell you." But Lucy interrupted him, her voice filled with bitterness. "Go ahead, Alexander. Tell him how you left his mother pregnant. How you lived happily for 10 years without knowing about his existence." "Lucy, please," Alexander pleaded, but it was too late. Matteo looked from one adult to another, his eyes filling with tears as he began to understand. "Alexander, is my dad?" The silence that followed was the confirmation Matteo needed. With a sob, the boy broke free from Elena's arms and ran out of the room. "Matteo!" Elena shouted, running after him. Alexander made a move to follow them, but Lucy grabbed his arm. "It's over, Alexander. We're done." With those words, she left the room, leaving Alexander alone with the weight of his actions and the consequences of years of secrets. Standing there, in the middle of his office, Alexander felt as if his world was crumbling. Everything he had built, all the lies he told to protect his perfect life, had crumbled in a matter of minutes. He knew he needed to chase after Matteo and Elena, try to mend what he had broken. But how could he make up for so many years of absence? How could he explain his choices? With a heavy heart and a mind in turmoil, Alexander left his office, determined to do whatever it took to regain his son's trust and try to build the family he never knew he desperately wanted. The days following the revelation in Alexander's office were a whirlwind of emotions for everyone involved. Matteo, devastated by the discovery, refused to leave his room or speak to anyone. Elena, torn between concern for her son and guilt for having hidden the truth for so long, barely managed to sleep. Alexander, for his part, felt as though he was walking on shards of glass. His personal and professional life were in ruins. Lucy had left home, taking not only her belongings but also threats of a scandalous divorce that could tarnish his reputation in the business world. On a particularly difficult morning, Alexander decided he could no longer stand by. He needed to speak with Matteo, to explain himself, to try to mend what had been broken. With a heavy heart, he drove to Elena's apartment. When Elena opened the door, her eyes were red and swollen. "Alexander, I don't know if it's a good idea for you to be here right now." "Please, Elena," Alexander pleaded, "I need to talk to him. I need to try to explain." Elena hesitated for a moment before stepping aside to let Alexander in. "He's in his room. But don't expect much. He's barely spoken to me either." Alexander walked slowly to Matteo's bedroom door, his heart pounding in his chest. He knocked gently. "Matteo?" "It's me, Alexander. Can we talk?" Silence. "Please, son. I know you're hurt and confused. I am too. But we need to talk." After what seemed like an eternity, the door slowly opened. Matteo stood there, his eyes swollen from crying, a mix of anger and sadness on his young face. "Why?" was all Matteo could manage to say, his voice choked. Alexander felt his heart break. "Oh, Matteo. It's complicated. I've made many mistakes. Mistakes I deeply regret." He tried to approach, but Matteo backed away. "You didn't want me? Is that why you were never around?" No, it's not that," Alexander responded quickly. "I didn't know about you. If I had known." "Lies!" Matteo shouted, tears streaming down his face. "You humiliated my mother. You abandoned her." Elena, who had been listening from the living room, could no longer hold back. She entered the room, her own eyes tear-filled. "Matteo, it's not just Alexander's fault. I hid the truth too. From both of you." Matteo looked at his mother, the betrayal evident in his eyes. "Why, Mom? Why did you lie to me all these years?" Elena sat on Matteo's bed, trying to find the right words. "I was hurt, scared. I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me? From having a father?" Matteo countered. Alexander intervened. "Matteo, your mother did what she thought was best at the time. The blame is mine. I was selfish, immature. But I want to make things right now. I want to be part of your life, if you'll let me." Matteo looked from Elena to Alexander, confusion and pain evident on his young face. "I don't know. I need time." "Of course, son," Alexander said softly. "Take the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready." Meanwhile, across town, Lucy was meeting with her lawyer. "I want everything," she said, her voice cold and determined. "Half the company, half the assets. And I want everyone to know the kind of man Alexander Foster really is." The lawyer made notes, frowning. "Mrs. Foster, a public and scandalous divorce might be harmful to both parties. Perhaps a more discreet approach would be better." Lucy laughed bitterly. "Discreet? He cheated on me, made a fool of me for years. No, I want him to pay. I want everyone to know." Back at Elena's apartment, Alexander prepared to leave. The encounter with Matteo had been painful, but he felt a glimmer of hope. At least now the truth was on the table. "Elena," he said softly, "I know I have no right to ask for anything, but thank you for giving me this chance with Matteo." Elena nodded, weary. "He deserves to know his father, Alexander. But it will take time. For all of us." When Alexander arrived home that night, he found a legal notice on his door. Lucy was filing for divorce, and the demands were astronomical. It wasn't just money she wanted, it was revenge. Sitting in his empty living room, Alexander faced the consequences of years of poor decisions. His marriage was over, his relationship with his newly discovered son was fragile at best, and now his very company all he had worked for was at risk. He picked up the phone, thinking of calling Elena, Matteo, even Lucy. But what could he say? How could he begin to repair the damage he had caused? That night, as the storm approached both literally and figuratively, Alexander made a promise to himself. No matter the cost, he would make things right this time. For his son, for Elena, and for himself. The rain began to fall outside, the sound of drops against the window echoing the turmoil in his heart. Alexander knew the days ahead would be difficult, perhaps the most difficult of his life. But for the first time in a long time, he was ready to face the storm head-on. The morning arrived gray and cold, mirroring Alexander's mood. He had barely slept, his mind a whirlwind of worries and regrets. Upon arriving at the office, he was met with curious stares and whispers from the employees. It seemed the news of his secret son and impending divorce had already spread. He had hardly sat down when his assistant entered, looking nervous. "Mr. Foster, there are reporters downstairs. They're asking for a comment about, well, everything." Alexander closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Tell them I have no comments at the moment." Meanwhile, Elena faced her own challenges. As she arrived at work, she was called into her boss's office. "Elena, you know we support our employees during tough times," he began, looking uncomfortable. "But all this publicity, it's not good for the company." Elena felt her stomach sink. "Are you firing me?" No, he quickly replied. Maybe it's better if you take a vacation until things calm down." With a heavy heart, Elena returned home, where she found Matteo still secluded in his room. She knocked gently on the door. "Honey, can we talk?" After a moment of silence, the door opened. Matteo looked exhausted, with deep bags under his eyes. "What is it, Mom?" Elena sat on the bed next to her son. "I know this is hard for you. But we need to face this together." Matteo looked at her, his eyes full of pain. "Why did you lie to me all these years?" Elena felt tears forming. "I thought I was protecting you. But now I see that I made a mistake. I'm so sorry, my love. Really sorry." Across town, Lucy was at a press conference, surrounded by journalists eager for sordid details. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady despite the contained emotion. "I have been betrayed not just as a wife but as a woman. Alexander Foster is not the man everyone thinks he is." Cameras flashed as Lucy detailed years of lies and secrets, painting Alexander as a heartless villain who deceived her and abandoned his own son. When Alexander saw the news, it felt like he had been punched in the stomach. His reputation, built over years of hard work, was being destroyed in minutes. Desperate, he called Elena. "We need to do something. Lucy is twisting everything." "And what isn't twisted, Alexander?" Elena responded, tired. "You really left me pregnant." I didn't know you were pregnant, he exclaimed, frustrated. If I had known. If you had known, what? Elena interrupted him. Would you have stayed with me out of obligation? The ensuing silence was deafening. Alexander realized he didn't have an answer. He really didn't know what he would have done. That night, alone in his apartment, Alexander faced the harsh reality of his past choices. He picked up an old photo of himself, young and arrogant, and barely recognized the man staring back at him. Then his phone rang. It was Matteo. Hi, the boy's voice sounded hesitant on the other line. Matteo, Alexander replied, his heart racing. I'm so glad you called. There was a pause before Matteo spoke again. I saw the news. About you and that woman, Lucy. Alexander closed his eyes, dreading what might come next. Matteo, I just wanted to say, Matteo interrupted him, that I don't believe her. I mean, you've made mistakes, but you're not a monster. Matteo's words hit Alexander like a wave of relief and gratitude. Thank you, son. That means a lot to me. I'm still confused and hurt, Matteo continued. But I think I want to try. To get to know you better. Tears streamed down Alexander's face. I would love that, Matteo. More than you can imagine. After hanging up, Alexander sat, absorbing everything that had happened. He knew the road ahead would be difficult. His reputation was in tatters, his marriage over, and his relationship with his son was fragile at best. But for the first time in weeks, he felt a spark of hope. Matteo was willing to give him a chance, and that was more than he deserved. Determined, Alexander picked up his phone again. It was time to stop hiding and face the consequences head-on. He dialed his lawyer's number. Prepare a press statement, he instructed. I'm going to tell my side of the story. All of it. No more lies, no more secrets. As the night progressed, Alexander began to write, pouring his heart and soul onto the paper. He knew the next day would bring more challenges, more public scrutiny. But for the first time in his life, he was ready to face the truth, no matter the cost. The storm hadn't passed yet, but Alexander finally felt he had the strength to face it. With Matteo by his side and the truth as his compass, he was ready to rebuild his life, one day at a time. The auditorium was packed, television cameras strategically placed, and an anxious murmur filled the air. Alexander Foster, the once powerful businessman, now stood alone on stage, vulnerable before an audience eager to hear his side of the story. With trembling hands, Alexander adjusted the microphone and scanned the crowd. His eyes met Elena and Matteo in the front row, both displaying cautiously supportive expressions. That sight bolstered his courage. Good afternoon, everyone, he began, his voice initially tentative but gaining strength. I stand before you today not as the businessman you all know, but as a man who has made serious mistakes and is determined to correct them. He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. 10 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life. Driven by arrogance and selfishness, I deeply hurt the woman I loved. Elena, he looked directly at her, I am truly sorry. More than words can express. Elena, tears in her eyes, nodded slightly. Back then, I didn't know Elena was pregnant. If I had known. His voice broke for a moment. If I had known, I hope I would have been a better man. But the truth is, I was young, foolish, and did not deserve the blessing that fate was offering me. Alexander then turned to Matteo. Matteo, my son. I missed 10 precious years of your life. 10 years of first steps, first words, first days of school. I can't reclaim that time, but I promise you, here and now, that I will spend every day for the rest of my life being the father you deserve. Tears now freely streamed down Alexander's face, mirroring the emotion that swept through the auditorium. To Lucy, my wife, I ask for forgiveness. You did not deserve the betrayal and lies. I hope that one day you can forgive me, even if we cannot rebuild what we had. He paused again, looking out over the audience. To everyone who trusted me, who believed in my leadership, I apologize. I failed not just as a man but as a leader. Starting today, I am stepping down from the presidency of the company. It's time to prioritize what truly matters: family, integrity, and redemption. A surprised murmur ran through the crowd. I am not here seeking sympathy or immediate forgiveness. I am here to take responsibility for my actions and begin the long process of rebuilding. Not just my reputation, but the relationships I've damaged along the way. Alexander then stepped down from the stage, walking towards Elena and Matteo. Kneeling before them, he took both of their hands. Elena, Matteo, I know asking for a second chance is more than I deserve. But if you're willing, I'd like to try. Not as the man I was, but as the man I want to become. A man worthy of your love. The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. Then, slowly, Matteo stood and hugged Alexander. I want to try, Dad, he whispered. Elena, tears streaming down her face, joined the embrace. Together, she simply said. The scene moved everyone in the auditorium. Journalists, executives, even Lucy, who was in the back of the room, couldn't contain their emotion at this moment of pure vulnerability and love. Months passed. Life didn't become perfect overnight, but significant changes occurred. Faithful to his word, Alexander devoted himself fully to rebuilding his relationship with Matteo and Elena. Afternoons of soccer in the park, family game nights, and long talks became routine. Elena, seeing the sincerity in Alexander's efforts, began to lower her defenses. Slowly, the love that had never really died began to blossom again. Lucy, after a period of reflection, found the strength to forgive. Although her marriage with Alexander had ended, she found peace and a new purpose, dedicating herself to charitable causes. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, a year after the press conference, Alexander, Elena, and Matteo were in the park, having a picnic. Matteo was playing ball with some friends, while Alexander and Elena watched, hand in hand. Did you ever imagine we'd be here a year ago? Elena asked, smiling. Alexander gently squeezed her hand. No, but I am thankful every day for this second chance. At that moment, Matteo ran up to them, breathless and smiling. Mom, Dad, did you see that goal I scored? We sure did, champion. Alexander responded, pulling his son into a hug. As the three laughed together, Alexander looked up at the sky, silently grateful for the miracle of his reunited family. He knew the path hadn't been easy and that there would still be challenges ahead. But there, in that perfect moment, he realized that true success wasn't found in business or material wealth. True success lay in love, forgiveness, and the ability to start anew. And with Elena and Matteo by his side, Alexander knew he had everything that truly mattered. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our moving stories. Share with your friends so they can be moved too, and in the comments, tell us what you think. We want to know your opinion and your suggestions to continue bringing content that touches the heart. Every day gives us a chance to make someone else's day brighter.